After 2 weeks of Western diplomacy, its effectiveness is questionable, since there are no tangible outcomes. The Arab allies are starting to lose their patience, and their attitude is making the situation worse, as reported by The Guardian. The recent visits by Western leaders and diplomats to the Middle East did not bring the expected results. Additionally, as noted by Patrick Wintour, the diplomatic editor of the publication, the West's efforts to associate Ukraine and Israel are only aggravating the situation. Therefore, the 2 weeks of continuous shuttle diplomacy by the West appear to be failing, as noted by The Guardian's diplomatic editor, Patrick Wintour. The West's efforts have only yielded 20 truckloads of humanitarian aid reaching Gaza. Meanwhile, citizens in various Middle Eastern countries are protesting, and terrorist attacks are occurring again in European capitals, with over 4,000 Palestinians and 400 Israelis already deceased. We can safely assume that if Israel goes ahead with a lengthy ground operation to wipe out Hamas, the Gaza Strip's already devastated health system will completely fail. Western diplomats' visits to Israel had a twofold goal. Their first objective was to show solidarity with the country. However, the visits also served as a warning to proceed with care. President Joe Biden showed his sympathy for victims of Hamas and their families, but he strongly advised Israel to be careful. As Wintour pointed out, the president gently presented the advice by referring to lessons the U.S. has learned from the fight against terrorism. Biden urged Israel not to be angry, like the U.S. did after 9/11. The American leader also acknowledged, "While we have pursued and achieved justice, we have also made mistakes." During a press briefing upon returning from Israel, Biden stated that the U.S. military had consulted with their Israeli counterparts to consider an alternative proposition to a ground assault. Conversely, failure to act will result in loss of credibility on a global scale. He candidly urged Israel to consider their reputation, affirming that, if relief is possible, it should be pursued without question. This was how Biden addressed the Israeli authorities. Humanitarian groups welcomed Washington's actions, but deemed the supply of 20 lorries for 2 million people lacking. Wintour mentioned that the US's aim to create safe zones in the Gaza war zone was always going to be challenging, and might end up being an illusion. Very few advancements have been made on freeing around 200 captives. After talks between Qatar and Hamas, a mother and daughter from Chicago that were abducted on October 7th have been set free. But Hamas does not seem keen to let the International Committee of the Red Cross see the hostages, as they fear the Israelis will know their location. Simultaneously, Western nations are growing restless about the release of their people. During the visit of the British Prime Minister to Qatar, Rishi Sunak stated that London was prepared to do everything possible to save the British hostages. However, he did not provide many details. Sunak spoke to his Israeli counterpart Benjamin Netanyahu and expressed his desire for Israel to be victorious, but did not explain his vision of a successful outcome. Diplomats are currently brainstorming ideas for peace in Gaza. The Guardian's diplomatic editor thinks that none of the suggestions put forward are feasible. At the same time, a number of the US's closest Arab partners, influenced by public dissatisfaction, are becoming increasingly impatient and urging tangible outcomes. The Guardian sees yet another issue for the West in its efforts to connect the Ukraine conflict and Israel. For Biden, Sunak, German Chancellor Olaf Scholz and French President Emmanuel Macron, who have all travelled or plan to travel to the Middle East, there is now an increased risk that even the weak support which the West has attempted to gather in the global South for the conflict in Ukraine will disappear. Wintour thinks that Biden's effort to connect the Ukraine crisis with Israel could worsen the situation, as the world is already split over the armed conflict in the Middle East.